Hi everyone, welcome in. We're gonna go over some housekeeping rules pretty soon. My name is Kenya. I'm from the San Diego Law Library, and today we have Stephanie Hernandez with the County Office of Labor Standards and Enforcement. Before we start the presentation, we are gonna go over, like I said, some housekeeping rules while people come in. So this presentation will be recorded and posted onto YouTube within the next couple weeks. So if you happen to miss something or want the slides, they will be available. This is not an MCLE class. This is a class for the general public. So if you were looking for that, unfortunately, that's not what this is. Um, this is an interactive presentation, so if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat function below to ask the speaker the questions, and we'll go through them as they come. And last but not least, there will be a survey at the end of the presentation. If you could please fill that out. It's very important for us as that's how we know what classes people have interest in and what we should do more of in the future. And with that, I will pass it over to our presenter, Stephanie.
So let me share the screen. And you also here. Okay. Let's see my screen okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, hi everyone. Again, my name is Stephanie Hernandez. I'm with the County of San Diego Office of Labor Standards and Enforcement. I'm really excited to be here today to share some more information on the Fair Chance Act and local ordinance, and a little bit more about your workplace rights. And as you re-enter back into society, it could be a little bit difficult. So we'll talk about those things. But a little bit about me, just so you're aware, and hopefully be able to help you a little bit too, and in the work that you're looking for, and maybe something you're interested. But I'm born and raised here in Southeast San Diego, and I lived in Southeast San Diego. I'm the youngest of 5 girls, daughter of immigrants. Southeast San Diego is considered a lower income working class community where a lot of resources and services aren't as readily available as other places. And so for me, working in labor rights and helping those who are working class is really important to me. And so hopefully today you'll be able to learn a little bit more about what those rights are. And if you have any questions, please let me know. You can always contact me after the presentation. A little bit of a fun fact about me is I have 3 pets, 2 dogs and a cat. All right, so the information we're sharing today is for general educational purposes, not legal advice. And the reason I say that is because our office, and we'll talk about this, is actually able to assist workers in different capacities. And when those situations happen, we want to be able to chat about your specific situation in a more private area. And so that's why I talk about things on a general educational purpose level. I'm going to tell you what the law is, at least the bare minimum, right? Because depending on where you work or where you want to work, they may have different policies that supersede or are better than what the law provides. And so that's why I talk about those things today. And so typically I ask folks to tell me their name, the job or career that they typically have. And so I know this is recorded. So take a moment for yourself and think about, your elevator speech, 10 seconds, what you hope to do. A lot of people have said, I'm Joe Smith. I want to work as a peer support specialist or alcohol and drug counselor, and I hope to go back to school to do that. Right? Very simple. And so hopefully that is give you a second to do that. Okay. And then this is our agenda today. We'll talk about who is OLSE, what our office is, your workplace rights in general. If we have time, we'll talk about how to read your pay stub as well. But I really want to make sure we go into the Fair Chance Ordinance, some interview questions that might be helpful for you as you're going through the job hunt and the job application to figure out which questions are allowed to be asked, and then how to file a complaint with my office, and then also some additional resources that might be of interest to you. So you may hear our office called the Office of Ethics, Compliance, and Labor Standards, and it's because we are part of that larger department. So OECLS for short is responsible for managing all the ethic and compliance and labor standards and enforcement programs for the county. What that means is we have two divisions within that department, OEC. They're actually the ones that are focused more on internal county related situations. So it'd be sexual harassment or any type of harassment, right? Misuse of funds, or like someone isn't using program funding correctly, or if you maybe feel, right, that there is a program that you were not approved for because of a certain protected characteristic. Those are the things you would go for that office. And for my office, Office of Labor Standards and Enforcement, we specifically help all workers and employers across the county, regardless of your immigration status, regardless of where you work in the county. Say you live in Mexico, but work in San Diego, we help those workers and employers. And like some other departments, we have contractors. We have two Employee Rights Center, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. And Shaw Law Group, they're an attorney law firm that we work with to also provide legal guidance for employers. So a little bit of history. Our office was created back in 2021. You may ask what was going on in May 2021, right in the middle of COVID, right? And so during COVID, a lot of folks, right, were not being paid. Were asked to work in unsafe environment. We're giving them the right PPE. And so it kind of just brought into light a lot of the mistreatment workers had and how they weren't really being protected. And so a lot of organizations like Employee Rights Center, like a Center for Policy Initiatives, like Filipino Worker Center, all these are great organizations really fought with the Board of Supervisors to create, in order for our office to be created, because there was no one place that a worker could go to ask for help and guidance on what the law is, or ask for help if like, am my rights being violated? Who knows, right? And so our office was created by the Board of Supervisors, some that are still currently here, some that have finished their term. But just so you're aware, these are the supervisors that we currently have. And I always ask folks if you know who your supervisor is, and hopefully you do. If you don't, I highly recommend you look it up. Supervisor Aguirre is District 1. She's more of the South Bay. Supervisor Anderson is District 2, so he's more Northeast County. Now she's president, Lawson Reamer. She is the chair. She oversees the coast area. Supervisor Desmond, he's District 5, so he's more East County. And Monica Montgomery is District 4. She's more of the Central region. And so you are their boss. You pay taxes, which pays their salary, which pays my salary. So as a citizen, I always recommend you reach out to your supervisor, reach out to your local government, like the county, to talk about the things that you feel are needed in your community, which it could include resources for those who are just as involved or those who are coming out into the community. So just keep that in mind. So who is OLSE? OLSE, in a nutshell, is really good just as workers and businesses about questions related to wage theft, fair chance hiring, and other employment laws. We do that a couple different ways. We do it through, first and foremost, education and outreach. We offer trainings and resources to help workers understand their rights and protections, and also help employers understand what their responsibilities are as an employer. Oh, sorry, what's that? And so one of those things is education, as I mentioned, and for us, education could be the side of the same coin, two sides of the same coin, right? We can educate workers, but we also have to make sure we can educate employers. We can educate workers all we want, but if they know the rights of the employers, so how are we supposed to help both? How are both supposed to know? The labor law book is this section, and it's updated every year. So it is pretty difficult to understand. And so we try to make it as plain language as possible. And then when I also mean by enforcement of labor laws, most people think law enforcement. In our way, enforcement is not, wearing a police badge or, wearing a uniform like that. It's more about keeping those accountable for their actions. And that specifically is employers. We are able to hold those employers accountable using the law and enforce those laws. And it could be through a variety of different ways. It could be using state law, local county ordinances, which we'll talk about as well. and being able to say, hey, employer, you're not following the law, you're not paying this worker, you should pay them now, or we will potentially take you to court. We can do those things. And so it's one of the tools in our toolbox. We don't try to get to that point, but if it does, we have that. Investigations. Another thing for us is we have been able to launch investigations since August of last year. Over 650, we're probably closer to 700 now, people have reached out to our office asking for help. And so because of that, we're able to actually have our team members look into what maybe wages weren't paid, what violations occurred, were their tips stolen? And we'll talk about what wage theft is, but having the ability to do that is amazing. Not many jurisdictions have that. We were granted by the state to do that here locally, work with our district attorney's office, our county council, which is like the county's lawyers, and our office to work together to do those investigations. And we've gotten people paid, which is the best part. And then lastly, policy development. Very quickly, I would say in order for great policy and laws and ordinances and protections to occur, we have to work within the community to make those policies possible. And so what we do is actually work with those individuals who would be most impacted by a policy and talk to them and say, hey, what is it that you need? What is it that resources and services would be beneficial to you if you were to bring something to the Board of Supervisors? And we did that with one of the ordinances that I'll discuss later. Okay, so now we'll go into know your workplace rights. I always like to start off with true or false. A tool was broken by accident. Can an employer deduct it from my paycheck? So you're sweeping and you broke the broom, or someone actually has come to our office talking about they lost the key to the cashier box. Can an employer say, oh, you broke that, you lost it, I'm going to take that out of your paycheck? True or false? The answer is false. They cannot do that. Why? Because it's a business expense. An employer cannot deduct wages from your paycheck, one, without your signature and your authorization, but two, it's a business expense. It's something that you didn't proactively try to break. It isn't something you are trying to do something bad with, right? It broke. And so knowing that they can't take anything out of your paycheck that's not maybe taxes or social security or medical, right? You sign those off when you start the job or every year, depending on your company, but you're consenting for those items to be taken out. You're not consenting for a tool that you accidentally broke to be taken out of your paycheck. It could also be said that for uniforms. So if your company requires you to wear something with a logo, right, they have to pay for that uniform. They should be giving you some every year. Some companies will say purchase steel toe boots, right? But they reimburse you, right? Those are a requirement of that job. They also require you to pay for tools, right? If they ask you to pay for tools, they have to reimburse you for those things, especially if you're not a contractor, if you're an actual employee. The other thing is bounce checks. So how many of you I know most people get direct deposit now, right? But if any of you have gotten a check and your employer says, hey, cash it in on Monday and payday was Friday, that is still wage theft. That is still asking you to hold off on depositing a check. In the past, people would take checks to the bank and deposit it right then and there, and the bank could see whether or not there's funds in that account that you're cashing the check from. And if there is no money, the bank could reject it and say, sorry, there's no money in here, and then fine you a fee for trying to deposit a check. They can think you're trying to deposit a fraudulent check, right? And so an employer who doesn't pay you on payday has to pay you every day that you are owed money, a whole day's worth of wages. So say you were paid Friday and the money was not in your account, whether it was direct deposit, that means that employer, if it say it takes all weekend, right? Monday, it deposits it. Well, that's every day of wages you are owed for waiting, because payday is payday. You essentially enter like a contract almost, right? In better words, with that employer to determine that you are going to be paid the 15th of each month or every 2 weeks or once a month, whatever it may be. You are entering into that as I mentioned, like contract to be paid on a certain day. And so there are penalties. Probably one of the worst things you can do is for not getting paid on time, and then for also getting your check bounce. Overtime pay. So overtime pay, there's 3 ways you can get overtime. It could be working 8 hours, more than 8 hours a day, more than 40 hours a week. And the last one that most people don't know is working 7 days consecutively. So say, for example, you usually work Monday through Saturday, even if you work 5 hours every day, Monday through Saturday, and then your boss asks you, hey, I need you to come in on Sunday because your coworker called out sick. That seventh day is all overtime. That's why it's really important to know what your pay schedule is. Say your pay is from Monday through Sunday, right? And you worked that Sunday, that's still within the same pay period, that pay schedule that you're still working within. So that means that seventh day is all double time, overtime. It could be double time depending on your company's policies, right? If you're part of a union or there's a labor agreement. These are really important things to ask too, right? When you're about to start a job is, are they part of these things? So it's really important to know when overtime kicks in. Minimum wage. So minimum wage is different for certain industries, but in general, for most people, the minimum wage in the county, which is following state law, is $16.50 an hour. So that's what the state is doing, and the county of San Diego just follows that. But within the city of San Diego, it's $17.25 an hour. Why? Because they decided to pass a local ordinance, a local law to say we want to pay this amount minimum to workers. However, recently, the city of San Diego recently passed a local ordinance saying hospitality and tourism workers will be paid, I think, up to $25 an hour in a phased, so every year increases up to $25 till 2030, right? That's something locally that's been happening. You might have also heard about fast food workers, right, being paid a certain amount. That's a state law. And so if depending on the size of the company, you could pay $20 for nursing, right, for the healthcare field. They get paid between $20, $24, and $25. So it's really important to know where you're working and if there's a law that actually says you need to be paid more. For example, flag workers, the ones that are holding the flags, they're doing construction on the side of the road. In County of San Diego, if you are a flag worker and you're working on one of our roads, you're required to be paid prevailing wage. What that means is prevailing wage is a number that is set by the state, but that number is closer to $50 to $60 an hour. So I always tell folks, hey, do you want to get paid the bare minimum, or do you want to maybe go to school, get a certification, and get paid that amount? And so you also have to consider these things when you're thinking about wage. Meal and rest breaks. Most people always sigh when I talk about meal and rest breaks because it is hard sometimes to take a break. I will admit. But it's really important you do. Why? Because especially if you're working, your body's going to be tired. It is a lot of work, especially if it's laborious. If you're a janitor, if you are working landscaping, if you're working in a restaurant, right? You're constantly living. And so you need to take those breaks. My dad was a trash truck driver for 45 years. He just recently retired maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I used to find him and say, hey, you need to take your break. Even though he wanted to leave work early, I told him, no, you need to take your break. Why? Because now when he's older, right, he's 70, it's a lot harder for him to move as fast as he did. What's up? Because he's just older, but because the work that he did really impacted him. So if you're working, for example, an 8-hour day, you need to take your 10-minute break every 4 hours. You also have a 30-minute uninterrupted lunch break. But what I mean by uninterrupted is it's also more than likely unpaid, meaning that is your 30 minutes to do whatever you like. If you want to go take a nap in your car, go take your nap in your car. If you have a doctor's appointment, you have to do a chore, you have to do something, do you have those 30 minutes at least to do whatever you like? Company cannot call you, they cannot text you, they cannot bother you. If an employer calls you, just tell them, hey, I'm on my lunch break right now. I will come back to you later. They keep bothering you, badgering you, right, and messaging you. I always say, hey, talk to them and say, you're on your lunch break. There's a penalty if they keep bothering you and interrupting your 30 minutes. And so it's really important to be very firm with that. A lot of people, a lot of advocates, right, anything else such as this, fought for, and Dolores Huerta and a lot of other folks, right, fought for us to have our breaks. And so it's really, really important that you take that time for yourself, whether it be a mental break, a physical break, whatever it is, you need to take those. Okay, sick days. Most people think that you get three sick days. No, in the state of California, as of today, right, you are entitled to 40 hours of paid sick leave. Does not matter if you are part-time, if you're temporary, if you're seasonal, you are required, you by law will get 40 hours of paid sick leave per year. It's a little bit different on when you get those sick days and how you get them, but know that those are there for you. So for example, Some full-time places will say you have to work 90 days here before you can get your sick time or before you can start accruing. What I mean by accruing is, or they give them to you up front, is you'd have them already in your account and your pay stub saying you have 40 hours of sick time. Some say you have to work 1 hour to get 10 minutes of sick time, and then it accumulates. So you're working there for a while, and then you'll see, oh, I have 5 days now because I've worked here for a couple months, right? But know that you are entitled to those sick days. You can use it to take care of yourself, your family. If you have a child, grandma, son, I mean, wife, husband, whoever, and you need to take care of them, you can use that sick time. You could also use it to go to a doctor's appointment. If you have a court date that you need to go to, you can use that time as well. And also for mental health days. Most people don't think about it, but mental health days are extremely important. And if you are not feeling it, you have those sick time, use it. Another true or false question. Can an employer request a medical or doctor's note from you? I'll just sit with that one. Can an employer, your boss, ask or request a medical doctor's note from you? I asked this is tricky. The answer is yes, they can, but they cannot ask you for a doctor's note till after the fifth day, which is the 40 hours. So you have 5 sick days, remember, or 40 hours, right? They cannot ask you for that doctor's note till after that fifth day. Why? Because you are entitled to those 40 hours. You cannot receive any negative consequences for using those. And so it's really important to know that you do not have to provide a justification for using your sick time within those 40 hours. You just mentioned, I'm taking my sick time. You may have to sign a document saying you're using sick hours, which is fine, but you do not have to feel guilty about not explaining it. You don't have to explain anything. After the 40 hours, they are allowed to ask you for a sick note. Why? Because it might be something else going on, right? You might have to go on disability. You might have to be on workers' comp, whatever it may be, right? And so just know that they cannot ask you for those 40 hours. And working conditions, of course, you have the right to work in a safe and healthy environment, meaning you have to receive the right training about chemicals and hazards. If you're using that for work, if you're working in a warehouse, for example, you have to be wearing the right safety equipment. And they also have to have workers' compensation if you're injured on the job. Why? Because they have to pay for that. That's one of the things of doing business is you have to have workers' compensation. So why are we talking about this before we get into the fair chance stuff? Why? Because these are all examples of wage theft. Wage theft is when a worker is not paid for their wages they're owed. It could be not paying the minimum wage. It could be not being paid your overtime, not taking your rest breaks. Misclassification, that's a big one. So labeling them as contractors when you're actually employees is a big one, or being told to do certain other jobs that aren't part of your job description. So if you're a chef, right? And you're cooking, that's all you do. And then they start asking you to change the tile, paint the building. Those are different tasks that aren't part of your roles and responsibilities. So they're paying you less for something that would be paid more otherwise for someone else. Or not even getting your last paycheck on time, right? And of course, required to complete your final paycheck on time. I believe it's 72 hours. Don't quote me, I think it's 72 hours, but things like that. And so it's important to know this because people who are experiencing wage theft tend to be people who are women, immigrants, just as involved people, maybe like yourself or a family member, right, who've been formerly incarcerated. They're the ones who are most impacted. And they typically are the ones who also work at restaurants and construction, hotels, car washes, warehouses, nail salons, right? You're the most vulnerable. And sometimes employers take advantage of that, knowing that you're most vulnerable, right? That you're probably not going to speak up because you're on parole or because you have, you just got back and you're not willing to risk going back into the system, right? And so they know these things and they feel that they can take advantage of you. And that's a problem. And we see that in a lot of numbers. We see that in when workers aren't paid. So typically when workers aren't paid, they go to the state, right? They will go to labor commissioner, file a complaint and say, labor commissioner have not been paid. The labor commissioner will have a hearing. That hearing says, okay, worker, you are owed $5. Now you have to go collect on your own. The labor commissioner doesn't necessarily have to help you as a worker. Now that you've gotten a document that says you're owed, you have to go collect on your own. These numbers show those people that are owed money that they were told they'll collect on your own, you have to be paid, that haven't been paid are right here. So since 2020 to 2024 in San Diego, almost $12 million is owed to workers. And just in 1 year alone, it's almost 4 million for construction workers. And so that's the people who spoke up, who went to the state and said, hey, I'm owed money, but never got actually paid. Only 15% of cases who go to the state actually get paid. So what steps can you take as someone who's, going back into the workforce now that you know a little bit more about your rights? Document everything. It could be a notebook. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, right? A notebook like this. Document the hours that you worked. I worked this day, this day, this day, this week. I took my breaks from lunchtime this time. Have a conversation with your boss. Write it down. Say, we talked about I'm using my sick time XYZ day. Another thing is review your employee handbook. Most people ignore it after the first day. I promise you, ask for a copy, keep it in your email, print it out, whatever you'd like. Why? Because a lot of policies that your company has will be in there. They should be in there. What if they give you vacation time? That is not a requirement by the law. An employer does not have to give you vacation. They don't have to give you a holiday. But what if your employer does, right? What if they give you more sick time? What if they give you benefits, right? They're not required to do any of that. So it's really important to review your handbook. And if you're in a situation where you haven't been paid, right, or you're missing some hours, because that happens too, speak with your direct supervisor, right? Typically, they are able to help, but sometimes they may not know the answer, which is why I always say contact your HR. HR is there to make sure that you're paid and that the company does not get fined or have penalties, right? And so they want to make sure you get paid for the time that you work. So sometimes you have to talk to HR. They may not be in the same building or office, especially if you're hybrid or remote, right? So make sure you know who your HR is, and it should be in your employee handbook too. Again, you can always contact my office if you have questions or want to file a complaint. But we're going to ask you these things. Have you spoken to your supervisor? Have you talked to HR? What have you done? Did you document things? Why? Because that document, that paper that you wrote, even though it's your notes, those are admissible in court. And meaning that you can use those as evidence that you actually worked, right? Okay. So how to read your pay stub. I always like to go over this very quickly because I want you to actually go look at yours, right? And so I want to make sure that your employer name is actually on here. Remember, even though you work somewhere and the name on your shirt, excuse me, the name on your shirt may not be the same employer name that you have on your pay stub. Who pays you is what's on your pay stub. So, for example, a lot of the people I work with, so at the county, right? We have janitors, they're contractors. So even though they have a shirt or a badge that says County of San Diego, they're working for another company, right? And that company pays them directly. So it's always important to know who's on your pay stub. Also, really important to know your overtime, your holiday, if you have any, your sick time, vacation, all that stuff in those hours, because it has to be in your paycheck. And the federal law that all that information is on your pay stub. Also, if any deductions, that's important to know. If you have a union dues will be on there as well. So keeping an eye on those things and always make sure your name and address is most up to date, because when taxes come around, if for some reason your name is incorrect or something happens, an employer could take advantage of your name being incorrect and say they pay you a certain amount when they're not, right? So check also the name of the payroll system. You should have access to it. Most people have it online now, and so take a look at those things. Okay, now into what we're really here to talk about, right? The Fair Chance Act and the County Fair Chance Ordinance. So I won't have time to play this video, but we will put it in the chat. We'll also make sure that it's linked to this video for you all to see later. It's about 10 minutes. But this gentleman, he was doing a TED Talk in San Quentin, and he talks about how he went to prison. He went when he was 15. He was in there for 15 years. He murdered someone. And during his time there, he went to school, right? He had jobs inside the prison and figured out that he wanted to do something for himself. But there was a time that his hearing to be released came up. And he talks about how scared he was, not for the hearing itself, but to actually be out in the world and finding a job, because he didn't know anything else ever. He had been there since he was 15. So he talks about how for him, it was really important to share his story. He'd been there since 15, like I mentioned. And when you're that young and you're looking at, coming out at age 30, your experience is very limited, right? And you might be in the same situation. You maybe were in there for several years. But for him, he felt that he needed to talk about his experience being incarcerated during his job interviews and in his application. So he did a cover letter, and that's what he talked about. And every single person he sent the cover letter to called him back. Whether or not they hired him, he talks about this a little bit, is different. But the point is, he felt compelled to tell his story because his journey while being incarcerated was his life. It was him. It was into his personality at this point. For some of you, that may not be a case. It might be a chapter in your life. However, you still have skills and a story to tell. And depending on how you want to talk about it, will depend on how we discuss these things. But if you're bilingual, that's a skill employers want. If you're dependable and when you're incarcerated, right, you are required to be your bed or room or quarter, right, at a certain time. That means you don't miss the deadline. You means you went back on time, right? You had work ethic. Most of you maybe had jobs while you were incarcerated, right? Most folks have told me I worked in the kitchen, right? Or I worked in mentorship, or I did AA, or I did all these other jobs, right? Or I did cleaning. And so those are jobs that you had while you were incarcerated. That showcases a strong work ethic that you just didn't sit down and did nothing. Like you took the time to have a job and learn and gain skills needed to get a job one day, right? Another thing is you adapt to your circumstances. You Although you have these challenges in your life, you do not let that stop you, right? You continue on. So it's really important to be able to talk about those things to an employer and managing your time. How many of you have kids? When you have kids, right, and they're late, who gets in trouble? You do, right? And so you have had to manage your time with what time to wake them up, what time to feed them, what time you have to drop them off. Those are skills that you have that you can talk about when you're going to talk to your employer. So when you are thinking about looking for jobs and thinking about how you want to talk about your experience, the good thing about the Fair Chance Act and the local Fair Chance ordinance is it helps you decide when and how you want to talk about your conviction history. So the Fair Chance Act state version is mostly known as ban the box, and it essentially prohibits employers from asking about your criminal history in the job interview, in the job application, on the website, anything that says that you have been incarcerated, they cannot ask you. That question that you see right now on the screen, they cannot ask you that. There are some exceptions, but the reason why I bring this up related to your skills is because this gives you the same level playing field as every other person applying for that job when you are applying. They're not going to see your conviction history. They're not going to be looking at that box. They're going to be looking at what you have to offer. So if, like the gentleman in the video that you're going to watch after, he talks about it in everything that he does. Why? Because it was his life. It was his journey. It was the whole book. For you, it might be a chapter. So if it's just a chapter in your book and you do not want to talk about it, you do not have to. This law allows you to wait to talk about those things till after you get a job offer, right? So a conditional job offer is saying, congratulations, Jane, I'd like to offer you the position pending a background check. Then you will say, thank you so much, employer. I appreciate it. Can you please send me that job offer pending the background check via email so I can have it from the records? End of conversation, right? And then you would follow through with the background check. We'll talk about those steps, but I just want you to know that it is really up to you on how you want to talk about your experience. For me, right, when I talk about my personal experience in job interviews, I feel that my life and what I've gone through in life directly relates to the work that I'm doing, which is community engagement, where I help people understand their rights, right? And so for me, I like to talk about my personal struggles with not understanding my rights when I was so young. I have to talk about what my dad went through because he started a union, for example. He was fired for starting a union, right? He stood up for his own rights. So for me, I have to talk about those things to really showcase why I want a job. For you, you may have to decide, do I want to talk about my history or not? If you don't, let's talk about the skills you've learned. Let's focus on those things. An employer does not necessarily care where or how you got the experience. They just want to know you have it. So if you have 15 years of experience working in the kitchen, right? What did you do? You developed strong relationships with the vendors. You developed a strong relationship to feed 500, say, individuals every single day, 3 times a day. That's what an employer wants to know. They want to know what you bring to the table, not where you got the experience. And so here's some interview questions that I wanted to run by you all and see what you think the answers would be. So you can always pause this if you're watching a recording. But this is the first question. You're in an interview and ask you, have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime? How would you answer this? It's a trick question. The answer is one, they should not be asking you this question. They're not allowed to. Remember, there's very few exceptions. So if they ask you this question, they have to have stated beforehand that they need to ask you this question for whatever reason. So for example, if you're working at a hospital, right, they have to know if your crime, the charges that you were convicted with were related to drugs, maybe, or individuals, right? Or if you're going to be working at a bank, they need to know if your charges related to financial issues, fraud, right? Or if you were going to work out of school, you applied for a job at a school, they have to know if your charges are related to the children, right? So they shouldn't even be asking you this question. And so if they have that exception, they have to let you know at the very beginning when you're actually applying for a job. How about this one? Can you explain why there is a gap in your resume? Many of you may say, I have a gap, right? You have a 15-year gap, 10, 5, how many ever years? Technically, this is also a trick question. You shouldn't have a gap, right? You have experience working while you're incarcerated, right? Whether it be working at a library or feeding people, it doesn't matter. You do not have a gap. You have some time that you've done to work on yourself, right? And but you've also maybe have time that you work the job. This is where you talk about those skills that we talked about, the story that you have. This is where we talk about those things in your interview. You say, you know what, I've worked 5 years in a library where I engage with individuals who were looking to improve their literary skills, to continue education, to assist them with research, whatever it may be. Right. This is where you talk about those things. You shouldn't have a gap per se. Maybe if it's a year, then it's a year, right? And you can always say you took a sabbatical. That's a fancier word of saying you took time off for yourself. This is one that's common. I'm not going to go over that, but what do you know about our company? You should always research the company before you do an interview. They're going to probably ask you this. We run background checks. Will we find anything like this? Is this an admissible question? Not if they stated before. They're not supposed to ask you this question unless they show they have the exception. Can you describe a time when you worked in a team? A lot. I also teach at the detention facilities. And one of the young ladies said, well, I don't really work well with a team. I don't have any skills. So I asked her, why are you here? What charges did you have that get you to this point? Well, she told me, well, I stole luxury cars, right? And I said, okay, how? Tell me. She said, well, me and a couple of girls, we got together, we knew what time some vehicles were going to be at a certain lot, date and time, and we organized ourselves to learn what the cars were about, blah, 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 right? And so I told her, oh, well, you project manage, you led a team, you created a timeline, and you led a group of individuals to complete a task. Obviously, it was for the wrong reasons, but the fact is you did work as a team. And so, my headphones are still working. It's not do well, but that's just an example, right? Okay. We're not going to go over all these, but I am going to add these to the end so you have them. But these are some questions that you may want to answer. I got one time. Okay, so this is the process under the Fair Chance Act. So you did the job application, you did the interview, you got the conditional job offer, and now they say we're going to run a background check. Great, let them run that background check. Why? Because there might be certain things that they're looking for that they don't necessarily care that's on your background, right? And that what they have to do is something called You have to verify what type of background that you may be looking for something. If you're, for example, your job is you applied to be a driver, right? They just want to make sure your motor vehicle report, which is MVR, is clean, right? They want to make sure that you don't have any accidents or a specific driving record, right? You need those to be clean. Or so, for example, if you're working as a cashier, right? They may want to check your uh criminal background check to make sure that there's nothing related to fraud, right? Or if you have a certification, if you're working construction, they have to verify you have your identity is the same. Say you are this person who's applying for this job for this specific reason. So let them run the background check. This is what they have to do. You may be running a background check that's a lower level than what you really think, right? And so keeping those things in mind. And once they run the background check, an employer cannot rescind a job just based on the fact that you have a criminal history. They have to actually do something called an individualized assessment. What that is they have to say, okay, what's the nature and gravity of the offense? What happened? So say it was drug possession, right? And you're going to be working as a cashier. Is that related to the job? No, but if you're a pharmacist applying for a pharmacy assistant job, right, and you have charges related to drugs, that makes sense. There's a correlation related to the job, the nature of that job. And so that's the type of things that employers are going to be looking for. How are they interconnected or are they not? They also have to look at the time since conviction. There's no law that says by definitive date or but certain amount of years, we can no longer consider that charge. There's no law that says that. Typically, employers don't look past 7 years, but we've heard cases before where they have, right? Where it was 20 years ago. And there's no since day of release or day of conviction. There's no law that says that. And so, but just know an employer cannot just simply say, I'm not going to hire you because you have a criminal history. They can't do that. They're not allowed to. That's what the law says. And so they have to fill out this assessment. And so they fill out this assessment. Say, for example, they determine they don't want to hire you because of this. They have to come back to you and notify you one in writing that we aren't hiring you, why they aren't hiring. So what disqualifications is it, what disqualifying you for that position, even though they just offered the position. They also have to provide you a copy of your criminal history and give you 5 business days to respond. Business days, as I'm in like not including weekends, for example. Typically, most places are open Monday through Friday, right? So those are kind of the businesses that I'm talking about. And they have to give you a chance to come back and say, hey, I have evidence to show that I have rehabilitated, that I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago when I did X, Y, and Z. I'm not that same person anymore. And so what you also have to do is making sure that your history report that is actually correct. As I mentioned, I'm one of 5. My siblings and I, our items and things and records always intermix just because we've lived in the same home for so long. We have similar names, right? So you always should just double check your criminal history report that even makes sense. And if it's something that's wrong on your criminal history report, you get a 5 additional business days because of that. So what type of rehabilitation? These are some examples of evidence that you could provide. It could be character references from teachers, counselors, your probation, parole officers, family or friends. All those really go a long way, especially if you've done like AA or you did counseling, you did anger management, all these things that you've done to better yourself. These are the type of things you want to talk about. You also want to talk about any personal accomplishments. If you learned how to do a skill, right? And like I know at some facilities, they give you certifications for bikes, or they give you certifications to do construction or gardening or landscaping, I'm sorry, or there's, I know for hospitals, right, about cleaning up areas, right? They have different certifications for these things. So talk about those things. These are evidence. You should have talked about it during the interview, but these are some things you should be able to have to also have in your back pocket to share. And it can be in a folder, have it ready. In that video of the gentleman that I talked about that we're going to link, he talks about that, how he did that for his parole hearing. And guess what? He used that also for his jobs. So that's the same thing you're going to do. You're going to also be using that to help you prove that you are no longer that same person, that you have involvement in the community, that there's evidence that you have worked or have done something during your conviction, since your conviction. Sorry. Okay. So you submit all that information to your employer. And guess what? They actually have to take it into consideration. They have to reassess it. They have to look at what you provided. And so that's why it's really important to have all this ready. And then they have to come back with the final notification in writing, again, telling you why they're not going to give you the job, why it's disqualifying you. They also have to give you the procedure in which that company has to, if you want to like file a complaint against them with the Department of Fair Housing and Employment, which is Civil Rights Department, or even my office, and we'll talk about that. But they also have to tell you how you can appeal within their company. So our office, we and with other nonprofit organizations got together, went to the Board of Supervisors, and they told us, hey, create a local version of the state law to complement it. What else can we do to help people here in San Diego? Which is what we did. We actually went to the facility, we went to the jails, we went to the detention facilities and talked to folks who were currently incarcerated at that time and say, hey, this is what we want to do. What would be helpful to you? And most of them said education is number one. And so that's what we did. We decided to take on the education portion for the whole region as a county and make sure that people are provided with the free training and resources they needed to make sure that the workers and employers are aware of the rights. Also, the reporting process. A lot of folks said it was so difficult for them to submit a complaint to the Civil Rights Department. For us, we wanted to make that easier. So we decided, okay, we can take some of that on. Penalties is probably the biggest one. So we have the ability to issue a penalty to an employer when they're not following the law. It starts with 5,000, 10,000, and 20,000 for every time they don't follow the law. And half of that money would actually go back to the worker who reported them. We also require that during those 5 days, that the 5 business days in which that position has to stay open, we are actually making sure that position stays open. You can't fill it unless there's an emergency. Like if you're a lifeguard, it's 4th of July weekend, that's the example that we use. But they have to remain that job has to be open while you have 5 days to come back and provide that evidence. So our law, because local jurisdiction is funny, just so you're aware, little quick history here, right? When you're looking at government, right, we have certain jurisdiction or we have ability to follow certain rules in certain areas. The city of San Diego is its own local government. So they have their own rules, right? But the county, as the county, we do sometimes do work within the cities, right? Like we do with our wage theft enforcement. But with the fair chance, we have to only make sure that our laws can only impact those that are not within their own cities. So National City, right, or Vista, there's some other stuff like that. They have their own laws. We focus on the unincorporated area. So that could be Spring Valley, Otay, Pendleton, is government, so that's federal, but Valley Center, Bravo Springs, all those things. So what we can say is businesses with 5 or more employees who are located in the unincorporated area or doing business even with the county, because there's a lot of companies that do business with us that aren't in the unincorporated area, or if their job, the worker works at least 2 hours a week in the unincorporated area. So for example, if you're a remote worker and you live in Lakeside, even though your company's in the city of San Diego, but you live in Lakeside and you do remote work, at least 2 hours a week, this law still still applies to you and your employer. There's almost 15,000 businesses in the unincorporated area alone, right? And so anyone who falls under any of those is able to fall under our fair chance ordinance. But remember, there's still a state law, meaning there is still laws that protect you from the state, regardless if you're in the unincorporated or in the city of San Diego. It does not matter, or the city of Chula Vista. There's still state laws that protect you. But within our office, right, we can only focus on those unincorporated, or if you remotely work in those areas, or if you are doing business with the county itself. And we have helped people in those situations. We had some organization that was doing some contract work for the county, and a worker came to us and said, hey, I got offered the job, and they took it away once they realized that I was incarcerated for XYZ. And we said, okay, we're going to do an investigation. And we did. And we talked to the employer and say, hey, this is the law. This is what we require as a contractor with the county. And so because of that worker got their job back and they actually got back pay, right? And so we've received many calls from different people who, even though maybe worked in the city of San Diego, still call us, still let us know, because we can always try to educate that employer and let them know what they're doing is incorrect. We could also reduce the stigma that comes with those businesses and employers. There's a lot of federal funding, state funding, and local funding also available for those employers who want to give a try, to give those who've been formerly incarcerated a try. I like to use this. This is a free tool that our office created. What we do is put employers on blast who have not paid their workers. So I always tell folks, log in. This is the link. Go on here, look up the employer before you start a job, make sure that they are on here, because do you really want to work for maybe dual diagnostics treatment who has owes almost $500,000 to 33 workers? Probably not, right? If they're still in business, you probably don't want to work for them. And so I always say use this as a guide when you're looking for jobs to make sure that employers on offer. How do you contact our office? A couple different ways. Directly on our website is probably the easiest. You can always file a complaint or ask a question. It's the second little box that will show up on your phone or on your computer when you log in. It takes less than 5 minutes to file a complaint. We just ask for basic information. I would say put more, as much information as you can when you reach out to us. It's like your employer name, what's going on, that you hope, that you think you were not hired because of your criminal history. Let us know and we'll let you know if we can assist you. Because even though we may or may not, if we're not, then we always try to connect you to the right agency, to the right place who can help you. You could always call us or email us as well. On our website, we always have events going on, so you can always find us at events. Again, I teach at reentry facilities, and my colleague Mikey also teaches to employers. So you can reach out to us in different forms. These are some other resources that I wanted to share. As I mentioned, Employee Rights Center is one of our contractors. They actually help us a lot with labor disputes, wage theft, and stuff like that. They also offer free classes that you may be interested in. They have monthly clinics. They can go visit them. So that's their contact information. We work a lot with Second Chance as well. There are another organization that we work very closely with that help those who've been formerly incarcerated. We teach with them once a month about how to prepare to looking for a job. So if you need help, they're there for your assistance. And also CEO, they also provide effective and immediate services to those who've been formerly incarcerated, and these are the services they offer. And I believe that's it. And I will add my contact information in the chat because I did not have it here. I'm sorry. But you could always call me. But again, easiest way to get a hold of anyone in our office is through our OLSE at sdcounty.ca.gov email. We are always here to support you. And if you have any questions or want to go through any scenarios or have questions, more than happy to help you. Again, those other resources are there for you as well. But if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. If not, let me stop sharing.
So I don't think there's any questions.
Okay.
But I do want to just remind our audience that there is going to be a survey at the end of the presentation once we close the tab out. If you could please fill out that survey, it means a lot to us. And with that, I think that's the end of our presentation.
Awesome. I'm gonna put the video link
Of
here and
course.
then I'll put my email in case anyone wants to reach out.
And then
And
these links and her contact information will also be available on the YouTube recording in the description.
awesome. I'm
Awesome.
more than happy to do any other future trainings for anyone. If you have questions or want me to go do workshops for your organizations, please reach out. I'm more than happy to do that. Hopefully this is a great resource for folks to watch and hear
Mhm.
about in the future as well.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. We really appreciate it here at the San Diego
Of
Law
course.
Library. Have a good one.